Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our concurrent session titled Regions at a Turning Point, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Their Neighbors. My name is Sara Abbasi, and I'm a board member with Developments in Literacy, or DIL. DIL works to promote literacy, especially for girls, by establishing community-based schools in the underdeveloped regions of Pakistan. As our title suggests, the session will take a look at Pakistan and Afghanistan, who are struggling under the weight of enormous political, economic, and social challenges that threaten to debase these countries further. Panelists will share their unique perspective on the role that the social sector has played and can play in these countries. The main focus of their presentations will be on innovative solutions as a route to stability and equity in the region. Joining me on the panel are Sima Samar. Dr. Samar was appointed as the inaugural chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission in June 2002. Dr. Samar has participated in many international forums on human rights, democracy, and transitional justice. Rahman has been Acumen Fund's Pakistan country director since 2006, when he launched the Pakistan operations of the fund. Mr. Rahman is responsible for directing Acumen Pakistan's overall operations, including portfolio development and management, business development, and talent. Charles MacCormack is president of Save the Children, a nonprofit organization with programs in the US and more than 50 countries. He also serves as co-chair of both the Basic Education Coalition and the Campaign for Effective Global Leadership. He is a founding board member of Malaria No More and is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mirza Jahani has been Chief Executive Officer of Aga Khan Foundation USA since November 2009. Following 5 years with the United Kingdom's Department for International Development, DFID, and having served most recently as Senior Governance Advisor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We will begin with Dr. Samar, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the participant and their interest to our region, actually. I don't know if there's a single turning point to stability in our region, but I would like to point out some of the issues. One of the issues I think which is very, very important to change or to promote stability in Afghanistan and Pakistan is to educate the people. Educate the people and specifically educate the young generation. Because one of the issues that we face, we have a lot of religious school which is unfortunately funded during the war in Afghanistan, and it's really increased, and a lot of children has been on those religious school or madrasas, and they are being brainwashed and trained as terrorists. The problem is there were no other alternative for those children to get education. And of course, it's very, very closely related to the poverty within the region. And the lack of education, of course, increases the poverty. It doesn't give possibility for the families or for the mothers, particularly to choose the number of their children. If we really do not touch the population control, of course, we cannot really work on reduction of poverty. That is very, very clear. But I see the overall problem within the two countries on two levels, on two different fields. One is the government responsibility, and the second one is the citizens' responsibility, or the citizens, what the citizens should do. I think on the government side, one, the government has to really promote the good governance in both of the countries. There's no doubt that both of the country government is not responsive to the people's need, and they are not, they are corrupt, and they are not really, both of them did not really came in power through real free and fair and participation of the people, free and fair election, and full participation of the people. That is one of the issues. Two, the government always has to be responsive to the need of the people. And that is not the case. If you look at the problem of the flood in Pakistan, practically the Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban was more, let's say, responsive or quicker, took quicker action than the Pakistani government. I hope I'm wrong on this, what we got from the media, or what information that we got. So the government has to be responsive on those problems, and not only on the disasters, but on daily life of their people. The third thing, in my view, the government has to really be accountable. First of all, transparent, and to be accountable. And that transparency is not existing within our government. There are always corruption, and there are always the relationship is preferred than the qualification within the appointment of different people in different position of the state institution, including the judiciary system in both of our countries. It's worse than in our country, but maybe it's a little better in Pakistan. But I cannot really talk too much about the situation in Pakistan. And the final issue, in my view, specifically the problem between Afghanistan and Pakistan, both sides, we blame each other, we accuse each other of instability in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan, because when there's a suicide attack, we always, in Afghanistan, we blame that it's Pakistan who send all these suicide attackers to Afghanistan. And then when it is in Pakistan, of course, Pakistan is saying it's sent by Afghanistan. But practically, both of the countries trapped by those terrorists, which we created ourselves, which Pakistan created, which our country created. So that requires strong political will in order to finalize, to finish the problem. And that, in my view, requires, again, the government, both of the government, has to acknowledge the problem. You know, it's a kind of a denial of the problem in both of the country. The denial of the problem, in my view, is not going to solve the problem. It is, I think we have 10 minutes. But, so the denial of the problem by both sides of the country is not going to help. We have to acknowledge that there is a problem, it does exist, and we have to sit together honestly and try to find a solution for the problem. And that requires a real, honest action by both sides. And the other issue, I think, which is really, really important on the people side, is that one, the people has to be educated, and the people has to keep the government responsible also. And that requires a strong civil society, and honest civil society, in order to take action, in order to give, to try to promote the people's civic responsibility and push the people to take their governments accountable and responsible for the action they are taking. Of course, the second issue on the public side is to reduce the poverty in both of the countries. Because of the poverty, actually, the families are giving their children to get education in those religious school in order to, and they are staying in those religious confined madrasas, and they are brainwashed. So I don't think they will be able to hire educated one. Even if they are able to hire educated one, that will be really a very low number compared to uneducated people who are used and hired by the terrorist groups. The third issue, I think, it should be alternative should be provided to the public. In my own experience in Afghanistan, that we had a religious school in every village. When we started school, formal school, then practically those religious schools were closed down because the people were not interested to send their children to the religious school. So that is it. We always have to provide alternative in job opportunity for the people, not to stop them, not to join the Al-Qaeda or Taliban in both of our country. And finally, I would say that we all have to focus on the half of the population, which are women, and practically the women are not in a decision-making level in both of the country. I mean, the decision is always made by the men. If you look, I don't know how much in Pakistan, but in Afghanistan, we don't have a lot of women who are in a position of decision-making on the international level or in the national level. So we need to focus on women. We need to bring them and include them on the decision-making policies and use women as a strong force for building peace and for building stability and bringing stability in the region. I stop here and I'm waiting for some difficult questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sara, and it's a real privilege to be here with the esteemed panel and with all of you today. I think many of us who've been following Pakistan are aware of the problem the country faces, from the challenging economic situation, stagnant growth, rising inflation that has really increased the levels of poverty in the country. We've always got the scourge of militancy and extremism that is rising as well. A real absence of political leadership, lack of or dilapidating infrastructure that's creating a serious energy problem and so on. So I think there are certainly significant challenges that Pakistan's facing and probably is going through one of the more critical junctures in its history. But I want to actually talk about where Acumen Fund has seen both opportunity and hope in building a different Pakistan and building a better, more vibrant and prosperous Pakistan where there's equity and there's stability. We are a social venture fund that invests in early stage businesses that serve the poor. And we also try to develop a new set of leaders that have both moral imagination, ethical fiber, as well as a real pragmatism and approach to sort of tackling problems in the country. And I wanted to start with the fact that while Pakistan, on the one hand, is facing some economic challenges, one opportunity that the country faces is around agriculture. So while the country has faced, has been sort of going through a series of recession, interestingly, in the rural areas, there's been an increase in productivity, and actually the economy is booming partly because productivity has gone up, the crops have really done well, and commodity prices have gone up. And so the first time in Pakistan's history, you're actually seeing a shift in wealth and income from the urban areas to the rural areas of the country. And what that means is that there's a real opportunity like never before to build on that and turn that to long-term sustained growth. Agriculture and rural development obviously is very critical to Pakistan's progress because 60% of the labor force or thereabouts is involved in agricultural production. And while I don't believe there's a direct correlation between sort of poverty and militancy, that said, that increasing economic opportunity, particularly for the poor, can reduce the stress in lower income populations that may, in other words, contribute to extremism and so on. And we've made an investment, so we've got a very strong focus on investing in agricultural businesses that create economic opportunity for the poor, poor farmers and poor livestock growers. And I want to talk about a couple. The first is in an agricultural microfinance bank that's in southern Punjab, sort of between, in the center of Pakistan. Southern Punjab is the part of the cotton and wheat belt of the country It's also otherwise known as an area that has seen a mushrooming of a lot of the madrasas. Now, many of them are doing a great job by providing free education and sort of homes for poor, destitute children, but it's also been sort of a base for the extremism in that part of the country. And what this microfinance bank is doing is providing credit to small farmers who would otherwise be dependent on the local money lender to secure credit and essentially grow their crops, buy inputs and so on and so forth. And they've been working in the area for 5 years, and they have now lent to over 200,000 farmers who are farming between them on about 800,000 acres of cotton and wheat and so on. So on the one hand, and what that's doing is the fact that this institution is able to help the farmers break away from the shackles of the money lender means that they have the space and the economic opportunity to build a better future for themselves. And so what do they do with that? And one of the interesting things we've learned is that as farmers get more sort of a stable economic situation, there's a tendency for them to then start investing in education. And so as we met with farmers and said, what will you do with the extra wealth that you're earning? They would say that we want to invest in education for our children, and especially for our girls. So for us, one of the ahas coming out of this was that some of the stereotypes one has that the poor don't believe in education, some of those myths are broken away. So by creating economic opportunity, one can really create that building block. And I think in the rural context of Pakistan, we've got a real opportunity. Similarly, we've invested in a business that is looking to increase the productivity of livestock, which is through crossbreeding and high quality, low cost artificial insemination that aims to increase the productivity of livestock that again will increase the income of poor dairy producers. So that's one area. The second is that we also believe that, especially if you look at Pakistan today, and I think one of the biggest problems Pakistan faces is an absence of leadership. A lot of the problems that Sima talked about, a lot of the problems facing in the country is really resulting from a leadership that doesn't really have much vision and imagination for building a different kind of future. And so we are investing in emerging leaders who have again, the business acumen fund, but also the business acumen and as well as the ethical fiber to work towards a different future. And one of them is Jawad Aslam, who's an ex-Acumen Fund fellow. Acumen Fund has a global fellows program where we train young professionals for 2 months in New York, and then they're placed with our investees in the field where they help them build their businesses. And Jawad is one of them, and he has been involved over the last few years in building low-cost housing and community development for the poor. And he's led a pioneering project in Lahore, which is Pakistan's second largest city, where they're providing housing and a community environment to housing where people can own their homes and a community environment for low-income families. And the first project is about 20 acres. It's about 450 units, households making about $150 or so a month. Now, it's actually a business that's looking to make a profit. One of the interesting things about Jawad is that he's looking to build a community where people really live in harmony and peace with one another. And so one of the interesting stories out of this is that the community is very diverse, and you've got people from all sorts of religious backgrounds, Sunnis, Shias, and different denominations of those living in that one community, but there's only one mosque. And so Jawad has worked with community leaders to organize them and mobilize them so that they all pray together. And that is a small example, and it's a small symbol of what could be possible if you really persevere to build solutions not just at the macro level, but also sort of working in the grassroots. It's a community, again, that's despite the turmoil and the tension around, that lives in relative peace, and again is looking to build their future. I was recently in Peshawar which is close to the border with Afghanistan. That's the capital of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, with another one of our fellows, Muhammad Zahoor, who's from Dir, which is near the tribal areas. And I had met with a group of young professionals over there, about between 25 and 30 years old, and I was just amazed and inspired by, apart from the fact that there's a real stereotype about that part of the country, but just that there's a real energy and hunger for building businesses and getting into social entrepreneurship, building solutions that last for the future. And it can be in human rights, civil rights, women's empowerment, access to justice, all creating economic opportunity. And to see that energy and drive in the younger generation. In fact, some of the young gentlemen and women over there actually got quite emotional about the fact that they just don't have access and they don't have visibility because the entire focus of the country is on the Taliban and militancy and so on and so forth. So for us, and for me on a personal level, just an inspiration and drive to say, how do we create opportunity and access for these young emerging leaders who are the future of the country, so that over the next 10 to 20 years, we see different faces emerging on the larger macro and political map of the country. And so Acumen is now in the process of exploring a local fellows program, which is inspired by a global program where we will look to train Pakistani professionals from all socioeconomic backgrounds and different professional backgrounds, including government and the private sector, to again see how they can work towards the future. So with that, my time's up, so I'm going to take questions when they happen. Thank you.
Great. Well, I was in this room yesterday at this time for a session on teen philanthropy, and the room was packed, and the age of the panelists went from 16 to 22. So I hope what we lack in youthfulness will make up in enthusiasm. But it wouldn't have been all bad to have panelists 17 to 22 for this subject, because it is good to remember that half the population of Afghanistan and Pakistan is under 21. And so a great deal of what is at stake will have to do with the conditions under which those tens of millions of young people enter their adult lives. The topic of this panel is region at a turning point. So I will start by addressing the region and the turning point. You have the map, and you have Pakistan and Afghanistan at the center of this map, but what you see around is India, China, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, of course Iran, Turkmenistan, Russia, etc. And unlike maybe Eastern Europe, Pakistan and Afghanistan don't have the opportunity of growing up in a stable regional environment. In fact, obviously, you're all aware that this part of the world has been a crossroads and a point of conflict for literally millennia. Persians and Macedonians, Russians and the British Empire, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, the world's great religions and civilizations have come together literally right at the center of this map for 3,000 years. And you look at that geographical map and you see Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and China and India and so on. But in fact, for most of the people, what they see are Tajiks and Pashtuns and Turkmens and Persians and Baluchis and so on, and those borders, those national borders, those map borders, of course, cut across every one of those linguistic and ethnic groups. So that doesn't help matters in the larger scheme of things either, that the identities that people have are not with those national boundaries. They are with linguistic and ethnic commitments and cultures and values that are divided by these borders. So that's yet another challenge that this part of the world faces. So that's a bit about the region. Now, let me say a word or two about the turning point. On the one hand, every day that a girl completes the 6th grade or a young person starts a new business, this part of the world has gone through a small micro turning point. But I would argue it is not at a macro turning point yet. Having spent many decades in this field and having seen times when countries like Taiwan and Thailand and Malaysia and Brazil and Chile looked like Afghanistan and Pakistan, civil strife, military regimes, coups, corruption. I have seen lots of important countries reach turning points and hit the tipping point and move on to sustainable democracy and political development. I began my own work in Latin America 20, 30 years ago, and I remember in Brazil, which was as corrupt and brutal a country as you would ever not want to be in, and in some ways makes Pakistan and Afghanistan look pretty good. The Brazilians used to have a saying that Brazil develops at night when the government goes to sleep. And I would argue to a certain extent in Pakistan and Afghanistan that Pakistan and Afghanistan develop at night when the government is asleep, because it doesn't have their hands in the bank accounts of the people that are building schools and creating businesses and so on and so forth. And so I would direct our attention to the reality that democracy and development really, of course, have policy frameworks and rules of law and judiciaries, but they also have to have a critical mass of educated people and opportunity for girls and women and schools and teachers and superintendents and so on and so forth. And there's no political quick fix for that. You have to train the teachers, you have to prepare the superintendents, you have to have the village health workers, and whether you have an authoritarian regime or a democratic regime or rule of law, whatever, that hard work has to be done, and a lot of it is being done in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but at the local level, and you might say when the governments are asleep. There are also intermediate institutions and areas, and I have found in these times of transition where national governments are not ready for prime time, almost always there are particular provinces or districts or municipalities or ministries that have positive leadership and positive capacities. And one thing that change agents and philanthropists, I think, can focus on is strengthening those examples and those models, because development, as I have seen it over the years, starts there and then builds out as more and more individuals get experience with honest, committed leadership at scale. And both Afghanistan and Pakistan have those examples, and my two predecessors as speakers both represent institutions in Afghanistan and Pakistan that are models of how the next generation can learn about honest leadership. So one thing is to look for those areas of leadership and build from that strength to national strength. Also, in terms of those thinking about philanthropy, obviously, number one, you have to think, what do I care about? Am I interested in rule of law and national institutions, or I am interested in gender equity, or am I interested in these intermediate institutions, or what have you? But I do think there are lots and lots of examples of great, highly leveraged opportunities that will lead Pakistan and Afghanistan to democracy and development for the next generation. A couple of just quick examples from Save the Children. In Afghanistan, we have something called the Innovation Laboratory. And this is an entity that goes all over the country looking at evidence-based solutions that can be taken to scale. And then essentially promotes them, takes them to government, takes them to international donors, and so on and so forth, because there's an immense amount of bilateral and U.S. government funding in Afghanistan, and the vast bulk of it is not really producing long-term development, but there are examples of it. And so there's a way where a small amount of money has been able to identify and roll out lots and lots and lots of examples that could work. In Pakistan, we have had a very large response to the floods of last summer. In fact, Save the Children has reached almost 4 million people. We have 3,000 full-time employees and a relief budget of over $100 million a year all over the country, from the furthest areas of Swat right down into Sindh. And every single one of those projects, and there are 10,000, have a accountability and transparency, what would I call it, unit. We have subcontracted with an independent entity, a kind of Pakistani Transparency International. And in every one of these sites, there are signs all over the sites that say, and also with pictures for those who aren't literate. If you're not being treated courteously, if you're not receiving what you told you were to receive, if you're unsatisfied with the food or the education or the training that you're receiving, call this number. And there's a whole row of cell phones sitting there for people to talk to, and there's an external person, not a Save the Children person, walking up and down the line saying, if you have any criticisms, call these numbers. Now that is unheard of in Pakistan, and maybe 6 million, 7 million people have passed by this learning experience. And it does seem to me, if you roll those out at scale over time, you do create the conditions for positive change. So for anybody that's in the philanthropy side of this meeting, it does seem to me there are some very highly leveraged opportunities. Every organization here would have its examples. There are lots more. This is a long-term proposition. Afghanistan and Pakistan can be Brazil's and Chile's, but it's going to be 25 years from now. And it's going to take young people having these kinds of opportunities at scale. Thank you.
Charlie, that's a good point to end on, because that's one of the main points that I want to build on. But before I do that, I'm looking at the audience here and I'm seeing several familiar faces, some who have spent their lives trying to build Pakistan. And it's a daunting task to talk to you. And I just wanted to start off, if I may, Sara, by a show of hands of how many people have actually visited or lived in Pakistan or Afghanistan or the region. Right, so so we expect you to also feed into this debate about what are the turning points, because I think that it will be a lost opportunity if we don't do that. But it also gives me a basis for trying to say my few words to you. The Aga Khan Development Network, since so many of you have been to the region, will have seen us in one guise or another. And it's very difficult for me to sort of pick turning points in the work of the Aga Khan Development Network. The Aga Khan University, the Aga Khan First Microfinance Bank, the Aga Khan Jubilee Insurance Company, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and I could go on a little longer. Those institutions have been in those countries and beyond those countries in Tajikistan for a very long time. Where I spent 6 years in Tajikistan just after the civil war, including spending a lot of time helping a thing called the Northern Alliance, which was the last bastion of protection of anti-Taliban movements in Afghanistan in the 1990s, and learned a lot about the region from that time. And when I was there in Tajikistan, a lot of the Tajiks used to say to me when I recruited, how long is your project for? And and how long do you intend to stay in our country? And I would say forever, because that's the perspective that the Aga Khan network has. We don't go into a country or a region because we've got a big grant from USA to do some work. We are very selective. We identify our regions with a long thought process. And then once we go in, the idea is to stay there for a very, very, very long term. And that gives us a very different perspective on countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan. I just want to make 2 points because I really, truly am interested in your thoughts about the turning points. The first one is at a micro level, and it really builds on what Charlie was saying. We talk a lot about scaling up, and if there's one thought that I would like to really debate about is, there's no shortcut to scaling up. I'm sorry, you can't say to yourself, we're going to have a coffee shop, let's have 20. It doesn't work that way, not quite. I like the vision of a big scaling up, but there's no shortcut. And what Charlie was saying about working in village after village after village to build village councils, village organizations, introducing participatory approaches to decision making, takes time. The Aga Khan network across this region, including Tajikistan, now touches the lives of nearly 5 million people. But we didn't start off with 5 million people on our project document. We started off with 5 villages, 10, and then 15, and then 20, and so on and so forth. And the examples that Anun was saying about, Shia, Sunni, Ismaili, different religions coming together, I see them all over the place. In every village that I've worked in those countries or I've visited, I've seen diverse communities come together because they understand that one of the problems the problems are very common. So, and from that, what we've now got is a scale whereby individuals who have been in those village organizations are standing up for local government and are becoming members of the local government. And so I think that the awakening of a sleeping government is happening, and that's a turning point. And we need to bear that in mind. I've got an article here from the New York Times that describes the story of several of the villages I've been talking about. And they're a lot more eloquent than I can ever be. And if those of you are interested, please take a read of that. It appeared on a front page, no less. And Sabrina is my favorite journalist ever since that article appeared, because she had the guts of actually saying, excuse me, something good is happening in Afghanistan. We might want to read about it. The second point I'll just make is at a macro level. And the macro level point is that neighborhoods matter. And one of my criticisms of Sara when she helpfully had the idea of putting this map on for all of you to see, is I said, where are the northern cities of Afghanistan? Where's Mirza? Where is Herat? And that's typical of us in this country. We tend to think of AFPAC, but we forget the very things that Charlie reminded us about. These countries are at a crossroads of a very important part of the world. I mean, he didn't even mention the oil and gas in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. He sort of like mentioned the Great Game. But this thing has been playing out for generations, centuries. It's not a new thing. And I think some of you might well be asking, why are we there? I mean, many of my British friends lament the fact that the British government is in Afghanistan. But there are all sorts of reasons why this region of the world is important to us. And so the point I really want to make is neighborhoods matter. And it's important for us to sort of build from where there is stability. Charlie mentioned Brazil and Latin American countries that have come out of trouble. I saw Tajikistan moving from civil war to fragility to normalcy. It's not a perfect country. It's not a perfect government. But the point is, these very processes of building from bottom up has created change. And we see that in northern Afghanistan. And what we are trying to promote much more is a regional approach. One small example is between the borders of Tajikistan and Afghanistan, we've now got a health systems project. There's a hospital in Horog, which is just on that border, on the river between the two countries. And the normal approach would be to say, let's have a health sector project, one on each side of the river. And we're trying to break that. We're saying that the natural health referral area is this. So why can't that hospital help people just across the river? So we're painfully working with local governments to make them see the value of collaboration. And it's working in small ways. The Tajik government extremely frightened of Afghans crossing the river. So we're saying to them, do you mind if the doctors go the other way to help the people on the other side? Oh, okay, maybe. And the Aga Khan network has built 5 bridges across that river. Again, very painful, very difficult. Oh my God, all those Afghans are going to come across and they'll contaminate our country. Once the bridges have been built, sure enough, it's not only medical, it's not only emergency, it's economic. And markets have developed across in Darvaz and Horog. You're exchanging goods and services. And of course, the other big neighbor in that region is China. And what we're seeing now with the borders opening up in Murghab, Chinese trucks coming all the way down into Tajikistan and beyond. So I think the point to make is that neighborhoods matter. And if there's one thing that I would hope people would go away remembering is Afghanistan is a massive big country, twice the size of France or 4 times the size of France. It's a massive country. And there is a north. And the north is relatively stable. And let's not, A, forget that we've made some wins, and B, let's make sure we consolidate that before we create reverses in that stability. But I think personally, I'm an optimist, as you probably hear from my voice. But I'm an optimist because I've seen how civil war becomes civil society. And it is possible because we have seen it and we are seeing it in small turning points. And I hope to hear a lot more about your stories and what you have done in those turning points because as Baba Sayyid Ali, who knows a lot more about the region than I will ever know, said to me earlier this week, Pakistan are wonderful people but a bad government. I'm sorry for quoting you, and please forgive me for quoting you if there was a private conversation. But in truly, they are wonderful people, and at the end of the day, they are just like you and me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for terrific presentations.